Growing up as a Game Boy kid without an N64 or any other home consoles, it may not surprise you to hear that I know Zelda primarily through its 2D adventures. Link to the Past, which I know was originally an SNES game, Minish Cap, Oracle of Ages and Seasons. To me, this is peak Zelda, and the titles that I hold the most nostalgia for. So much so, in fact, that to this day, I would staunchly claim that Breath of the Wild, while really, really good, didn't really feel like a true Zelda game. And that I hope that the series would return to its classic and more structured roots with future titles. Luckily, Nintendo heard my cry and remade Link's Awakening for the Switch. So is my hindsight 20/20? Or have I been struggling to see through rose-tinted glasses? Let's talk about it. But before we get into it, just a quick reminder to support the channel by hitting the like button, smashing that subscribe button, ringing the bell, maybe follow me on Twitch or Twitter as well. Okay, on to it. Being a remake of a Game Boy game, the developers really did need to remake this entire game. It was not a port. I have been consistently impressed when it comes to presentation of Nintendo titles on the Switch. No, the graphics aren't necessarily the most photorealistic things. However, the character models, the worlds, they're all created with such wonderful detail. The color, the lighting. I find them to be some of the most visually appealing games on the market, and Link's Awakening is no exception. I was impressed with how the game looked and sounded. The effects and songs are faithful to the series. Somehow, though, it did have a hit on performance. There were frequent and noticeable frame drops throughout my playthrough. I wouldn't say they necessarily detracted from the experience, but I did notice them. Also, for some reason, it looked like the top and bottom of the screen had this weird blur effect added to the border. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it, and it really bothered me. It almost made me get headaches sometimes playing the game. Now that said, even with these shortcomings, the game is a delight to see and hear. Performance hiccups and all, it still looks and sounds great. And so for graphics, I would have to give a 4 out of 5 rating. Now for the story. Well, it's a classic Zelda game. You explore 8 dungeons and then you go fight a boss to save the world, day, princess, whatever. So non-existent out of 5, am I right? Okay, but seriously, the story is really not what brings you to play a Zelda game, though they do technically have them. Much like every other game, Link awakes on a strange island. This one happens to have a volcano with an egg in it. It's apparently some slumbering creature, and so he's going to play 8 instruments, and that'll wake it up, and then he can leave or something. And of course, as you progress, you learn some secrets that I'm not going to spoil here, but that's the basic gist. The island is full of people. Interesting enough for this title, they are familiar with other Nintendo franchises. You can win a Yoshi statue at the arcade, for example. And there's a number of other familiar characters throughout the world from other Nintendo franchises. Ultimately, this is more fluff than anything. Each character that you interact with and talk to still only has 1 or 2 lines of dialogue that they cycle through, and they all just stand in the same place, doing nothing until you talk to them. The story here, as it is with most Zelda games, is just a vehicle for the gameplay, and while there's not a ton wrong with it, that doesn't mean that this game has some groundbreaking story. So I would give it a 2 out of 5. When it comes to gameplay, I have always loved the classic Zelda approach. 8 dungeons spread across the game's world, each one containing a new item that Link needs to use to both traverse that dungeon and then the next parts of the world. They also let you gain access to previously unreachable secrets that you may have seen in your adventure so far. It allows what would normally be considered repetition to instead feel like a constantly evolving game. There's always a new item or ability to use, and there's always a place that you remember. Oh, I got the bombs now. There was a cracked wall in that last dungeon or last area. So there's always reason to go back and re-explore some of the areas that you've been to. I am happy to say that nothing has changed in that regard when it comes to Link's Awakening. I also liked the Nintendo influence in this game. There are some side-scrolling sections, which I would say are Easter eggs more than anything else, but they're fun. They have Goombas in them and pipes with piranha plants, and it's a nice touch to see that considering the overlap with the Nintendo universe that this game has. The gameplay loop is still addictive. I found it difficult to put the game down in my 12-hour playthrough, but there was still this nagging feeling in the back of my head, and it got even stronger when I was writing this review. And it's that while the game was engaging, and I did keep playing through it and didn't want to stop, it wasn't notable or groundbreaking. Yeah, it was comfortable and nostalgic for sure, but it did feel dated and, I mean, do I dare say derivative? The game felt like something I'd expect from an indie title, not Nintendo. And this kind of gets back to my opening, where I said I wanted Zelda to return to its roots, especially after playing Breath of the Wild. After playing through Link's Awakening, to me it's clear that its roots are kind of stuck in gaming history and sort of need to be left there. There's a reason that the 3D Zeldas keep evolving. For example, Wind Waker's huge ocean world, or, of course, Breath of the Wild's exploratory approach. The core game here is great. It's still fun. The wrapping around it really is a product of its time. Now, that's not to say that I think a 2D or even more traditional 3D Zelda can't exist in today's gaming ecosystem. It's just that I think it needs more than what these games used to have if it wants to remain at the top of the mountain. Unfortunately, as it stands, Link's Awakening is only halfway up. For a final rating, I would give The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening a 3.5 out of 5. And for a value, it felt like a $20 game. Unfortunately, this is Nintendo, so you're probably not going to find it for less than $40. I picked it up for $40 on a Black Friday sale. I do kind of feel like I overpaid, which sucks, but that's probably the best you're going to do. So if you do want to play that classic Zelda, this is that classic Zelda, and that classic Zelda is still fun, but it's not going to reinvent the wheel, and you just have to know that going in. So what do you guys think? Do you love Link's Awakening? Do you think it's fine that Zelda stay in that past classic design? Let me know in the comments down below. Again, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Twitch where you can watch me play all of these games before I review them. It's a great time to interact. You don't want to miss it. And I'll see you guys in the next video.